Wel, croeso cynnes iawn i chi gyd I ddarlith rithiol arall gan y Comisiwn, y cyntaf yn ein cyfres newydd ar gyfer y flwyddyn hon. Heno, mae Dr Toby am gyflwyno darluniau o safleoedd o Gymru wedi tynnu yn ystod y Gaeaf. Rwy'n edrych ymlaen yn fawr at ei gweld. A very warm welcome to you all to the Royal Commission's first spring online lecture. Tonight's talk, Above Frozen Wales, Aerial Archaeology and Exploration in a Welsh Winter, will be presented by Dr Toby. It's great to see so many of you having already joined us tonight. I can see that a few say they're from different parts of Wales and a few from England as well. Croeso cynnes, warm welcome to you all. You'd be welcome to ask any questions. Please use the question and answer function or the chat function on Zoom. Write in your questions and Toby will be happy to answer them at the end of his presentation. This talk has been recorded in order for us to share it on other platforms. For those listening in the future, you are welcome to send us any questions or share your comments and Toby will reply to them as soon as possible. Bydd y sgwrs yn Saesneg, cofiwch bod croeso chi gysylltun yn y Gymraeg os am adael sylw neu am ofyn cwestiwn. Felly, hoffwn ni nawr gyflwyno siaradwr heno, sef Toby Driver. Hi Toby, I hope you can hear me. There you are. Felly, I'll just introduce you gyntaf, neu gyflwyno chi nawr gyntaf, Toby. Diolch I chi am ymuno yn ei heno, Toby. Mae Toby wedi bod yn gweithio i'r Comisiwn ers dros 20 mlynedd yn rheoli'r rhaglen ar olygu ar awyr. Nad yw wedi cael cyfle I hedfan ers dros flwyddyn bellach, mae wedi bod yn brysur iawn yn ysgrifennu adroddiadau a chofnodi manylion safleoedd, yn cynnwys gwaith ymchwil newydd ar fringair Castell Nadolig yma yng Ngheredigion. Mae Toby hefyd yn parhau I weithio fel uwch ymchwilydd gyda'r prosiect Cherish, sy'n edrych ar effaith newid hinsawdd ar treftadaeth arfordirol yma yng Nghymru ac hefyd draw yn Iwerddon. Mae'n awdur ac yn ddarlithydd poblogaidd iawn, ac edrychaf ymlaen at weld y detholiad o awyrlyniau y mae wedi dethol I ni weld heno. Nifer yn dangos Cymru dan blanced o eira, dwi'n siŵr. Dr Toby Driver has worked for the Commission since 1997, and doesn't time fly, Toby? Feels like yesterday when you started, I'm sure. Toby manages our flying programme, but due to the current restrictions, he hasn't been flying to record Wales from there for nearly a year now. At least, I guess, preparing for this evening's talk gave you an excellent opportunity to revisit some of your favourite images and landscapes of Wales, Toby. Toby is also one of the senior investigators working for the EU-funded Cherish project, which is looking at climate change and coastal heritage here in Wales and also over in Ireland, and that will continue until 2023. As part of the Cherish project, it has been a personal highlight for Toby to have had the opportunity to carry out some joint nation aerial photography of the beautiful landscapes of Ireland. A bit of a change from Wales for you, Toby. During lockdown, Toby has been kept busy working on writing up various aerial discoveries, working with his Cherish colleagues to prepare specialist site reports, and he's been carrying out new research as well on Castell Nadolig Hillfort here in Ceredigion. Felly ar hynny eiriau, rhaid rhoi drosodd I chi Toby sydd am gyflwyno darlith heno I ni, Above Frozen Wales. Thank you, Toby.
Diolch, Angharad, and not so dda pawb. Good evening to you all, and it's good to see so many people joining. Now, over the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the transformative effect that snow and ice and frost can have on the Welsh landscape. It's been quite nice putting this lecture together, actually, reminding myself what it's like to be in the air. It's not so easy to find aerial photographs of Wales in winter. There's been a few drone shots on the media recently, but generally, winter is not a time that people fly a lot. If you look at Google Earth, all the colour imagery we see on there for Wales, commissioned by the Welsh Government and local authorities, that's flown in high summer with very flat light and lush vegetation. So tonight we're going to have a bit of a change, and I hope everybody's wearing a coat. It's going to be a little bit nippy up there in the air. We're going to be looking at the effects of lighting and low light on the winter landscapes and the archaeology of Wales. We're going to be looking at snow and frost and melt marks that happen and thermal differences. We're going to have a look first at how we get airborne and what we're looking for from the air. We're going to look at some of the dramatic Welsh landscapes of Wales in winter, and then some of its fantastic archaeological sites. And we'll finish with a couple of interesting things I've seen from the area of my travels, including, I think, some of the biggest snow writing that I've seen in Carmarthenshire as well. So I'll just advance to the next slide. We're a little bit reluctant. There we are. So winter is a fantastic time to carry out aerial photography. We think, don't we, that winter is a dull time and the vegetation's died off, but here we are on the coast of Gaeaf in November 2016 with low light, and we have the rich greens showing up the grass on Thurber Head here, just to the west, just near Worm's Head and Rossilli. And that sharp low light and the dying vegetation showing the ditches and ramparts of this Iron Age promontory fort. And not only the big earthworks, but the minute house platforms within it, all the details of the rocks, individual stones, and house platforms even out onto this rather dangerous ridge away from the promontory that weren't mapped before. So it's a great time to record archaeology and a great time to discover new sites. Another example of fantastic, dramatic winter light. Here we are in December light at Abergwyngregin on the North Wales coast, just east of Bangor. And this is the edge of the Carneddau Hills, now subject of a new Carneddau landscape partnership. And it's these intensive field systems that make the archaeology so rich up here. And in this low light, we can see the succession from the prehistoric style field boundaries on the top here, these great lynchets that have been built up through thousands of years of ploughing, the sites of possible houses, down to the medieval cultivation at lower altitudes. And we can see that S-curve of these ridge and furrow where we have ox teams ploughing and turning at the headland. So an incredible amount of detail. You can see individual sheep grazing on the pasture here as well. And this is from quite an altitude. So we have a lot of detail and a lot of new information coming up in winter light. Now, when we're thinking about recording earthworks nowadays, we often rely on LiDAR, airborne laser scanning. This is a very high-tech approach to recording the landscape, where a scanning laser flies over the land and gives you a 3D model of what's lying beneath, particularly those lumps and bumps, those earthworks. And now this is some airborne laser scanning we had commissioned for the Cherish project that we are working on Bardsey Island. And you can see it gives you a 3D computer model of part of Bardsey here. This is a 16-point hillshade, so you can light that model from any direction. And also you can interrogate the surface of that in the computer. This is a local relief model. We can see medieval and later plough cultivation on this headland by the lighthouse on Bardsey, and even a small farmstead here we didn't know about as well. Now, LiDAR's great, but it's very patchy cover for Wales. And now we have a new all-Wales LiDAR cover coming. Blue Sky, a company, is flying it for Natural Resources Wales and the Welsh Government, and it'll be recording Wales at 2 points per square metre. And this is going to be a revolution in terms of looking at the Welsh landscape, but it's not going to be quite high resolution enough to really get into the nitty-gritty of these complex bits of archaeology. The work we commissioned was 25 centimetre. So it's going to be a great resource, but we still need those eyes in the air. We still need those high resolution air photographs to really look at the complicated archaeological sites, and also to look at thermal differences in the winter too. Now, snow really does improve our understanding and our recording of archaeological earthworks when it comes along. And sometimes you don't get snow for several winters, other times we get a lot of heavy winters in a row. But a little like the LiDAR, it blankets out the colour. If we have a hill fort like this, Penna Creek Hill Fort, just above Brecon, a beautiful multi-vallet Iron Age hill fort, possibly built about 300 BC. We can see that at a low light in the summer evening. Not a bad light, lots of detail, but thick bracken covering and infilling the ramparts there. We come back in winter when the bracken has died off and the vegetation is low, we get this crisp sort of highlighting of these complex ditches and banks. And all the colour is gone as well. And this is particularly helpful for recording earthworks in upland landscapes. We can also look for thermal differences when we're flying in winter. A bit like we look for crop marks in summer, in the drought that there's been so much talk of over the last couple of years, when we're looking for crop marks showing buried archaeology. Much the same thing happens if you're lucky enough to get this on melting line where we've had snow. Here we are at Llangorse village, just near Llangorse Lake in Breconshire, South Powys, the Black Mountains above. You see the snow line and the melt marks here. The snow is only hanging on when we have a colder bit of ground. So we've got some earthworks here on the edge of Llangorse, possibly showing stony banks of a shrunken settlement. And you can see some plough ridges here as well. Not too much showing up, but this is the sort of conditions we'll be doing intensive reconnaissance. And on this flight, we located near Llangasti-Tarallyn, the corner of what we thought was possibly an earthwork moat, a medieval moat, though there are records of a nunnery near here as well. There's another earthwork here as well. So these are very faint melt marks in very low-lying ground. And similarly, at Falindra Farchog in Pembrokeshire, near Castell Llys, a few winters ago, we had a melt mark of a circle. This is the snow melting over a buried ditch because the archaeological ditch is warmer than the surrounding subsoil. Mike Parker-Pearson and his Stonehenge team excavated this site, and it was a Bronze Age lowland enclosure, quite a rarity in Pembrokeshire. So that's just shown up as a melt mark in winter. We can have some quite dramatic effects seen from the air with drifting and blowing snow. Here we are over Comisiwn a few winters ago when we've had a severe east wind, a real freeze, a bit like the beast in the east. We have old cleared forestry here showing up, but the main picture shows snow sticking in these gullies on the uplands near Comisiwn in Ceredigion, showing areas of former peat cutting or turberies. So all this peat would have been cut by hand in these big sections, big polygons. And this is one of the major monuments you see across the Welsh uplands in winter, all these peat cuttings. And similarly, near Llandyfeilog in Carmarthenshire, a few winters ago, melting and drifting snow in cultivated land, showing up an enormous number of earthworks, ridge and furrow cultivation, old farmsteads. Really, the archaeology is mapped out beneath the plain for you. So getting airborne, it's all very well if you can get to the airfield in winter, but I've had a few winters when I've been snowed in myself at home. Here we're over Whitland in Carmarthenshire on a winter's morning. You see the main roads open, but the housing estates are decidedly dodgy here. So if I can get to the airfield, and if the airfield's open and the pilots can get in, then we can get airborne. Our vehicle of choice is the Cessna 172. Here it is in wonderful freezing December light in 2019 when I was down at Haverfordwest Airport. It's a 4-seater aircraft, huge wings, powerful engine. It just wants to fly. It's a fantastic machine to get up in. There's not a lot of room inside. You have to get shoulder to shoulder with a pilot. One of the reasons it's been difficult to get flying during COVID again, really. But here's Eric waiting for me to get in. Not a lot of room in here. He's got all his controls. I let him fly the plane. I concentrate on the archaeology. We carry at least 2 cameras with us in case one breaks down. Long 200mm lens here, headset to talk to the pilot, first aid kits, maps. We're upgrading to tablets now, of course, so we can have a moving map in the air. And then it's a case of routing over the landscape and opening that window. But by heavens, it's cold when that window's open, when it's -5 outside the aircraft. Of course, everybody wants to know about drones nowadays, and they're a fantastic bit of kit. But with the aircraft, the National Aerial Survey. The Cessna will have a ceiling of 5,000 feet or more. We can fly up to 130 miles an hour. So I can get from Haverfordwest in Pembrokeshire, the airport, down to Cardiff in about 40 or 50 minutes. And if there's a snowfall lasting 3 or 4 days, the Cessna is what we need to be flying in. We fly within visual flight rules, VFR, so we can't go through clouds or fog. We have to fly during daylight hours. The drone is an amazing bit of kit. I'm a trained drone pilot, as is my colleague Dan here, but that's much more restricted. We have a 400 feet limit. We have to fly within visual line of sight, 500 meters away from us, no more. But the drone is an extremely powerful tool for doing modeling of sites in 3D, like we're doing with the Cherish project, photogrammetric survey, and so on as well. So both drones and aircraft are an essential part of our toolkit and will be for the foreseeable future. So I often take professional passengers with me, people researching the landscape, and in winter I tell them to wrap up. This is John Roberts, an archaeologist in Snowdonia National Park a few years ago at Carnarvon Airport. You see that lovely December sunlight beyond the plane, but it's a bit like being on the back of a motorbike in December. Once I've opened the window, you have a 130-mile-an-hour wind in your face, taking the air temperature down to -5 or -10 in the cockpit. We do have excellent heaters which keep the legs warm, but you need windproof trousers, windproof top, and a hat. And after 2.5 hours, you're really ready to land and thaw out. But to give you a sense of what it's like in the air, it's a short video over Pembrokeshire. My colleague Dan in the front seat over Ramsey Island. You open the window, you keep the camera out of the airflow, which is otherwise it would vibrate. Take the picture you want, shut the window and lock it, check the camera, check the picture, and liaise with the pilot. Here's Ryan, the pilot, all wrapped up in the cockpit, and you route on to your next target. So it's very rapid, very bumpy up there, a lot of vibration. But after all that, at the end of the day, we get these lovely, pristine pictures to show. Just thought I'd show you a very early start we had back in 24th of January 2013, when we had a good forecast for bright winter sunshine over Swansea and Cardiff, but we took off before the sun had risen. There was a gloom over Pembrokeshire, an air frost, and you can see just how cold it is outside the aircraft. Here we are, sort of steadily gaining height over the Pembrokeshire landscape, all the trees frozen. Routing over Llandewi Belfry, people just waking up to a snowy morning here. A few cars have got out to the main road. There's a tractor on the road here and somebody walking as well. So a lot of frozen people, frozen communities below the aircraft. By the time we get to Ffoslas Racecourse, which is just looking east to Llanelli area here, that's the Gaeaf Peninsula on the right. Ffoslas, we're just getting that yellow dawn light breaking over Swansea, but still not illuminating the landscape. And then over Swansea, over Town Hill, with this burst of morning sunlight. And there you have those amazing blue shadows that you get with snowy mornings. You can see the trees still well and truly frosted down there, and the low light striking across the landscape. And then the race is on. There's so much archaeology looking so fabulous. You just have to record it as much as you can in that time. So before we get to the archaeology, let's just see some winter landscapes across Wales, taken on the coldest, most bitter days when we're up in the aircraft, hoping that heater is going to keep our legs warm at least when we open the window. Here we are on the Tyvi Pools in Ceredigion, working down towards Strathflorida Abbey and the Cardigan Bay coast in the distance, looking west. 2013 was one of the coldest and snowiest winters on record for Wales. It had a lot of snow in January, and then in April, this deep freeze with this east wind, which iced a lot of the uplands. It's very difficult for lambing. And you can see here the effects of that east wind, these huge drifts and blows of snow coming directly east across the landscape. Fiercely cold in the uplands of Wales. So cold, in fact, something I've never seen since, Plynlimmon, the Plynlimmon range of Ceredigion, entirely covered in ice and shining like a block of ice, shining like a glacier. I've never seen this before. This shows you the depth of the freeze. I didn't fly in the Beast from the East in 2018, but it would have been a similar condition up there with that -15 wind chill we had then as well. On better, slightly warmer snowy days, the Brecon Beacons. Here I am flying with the Usk Valley behind me, west of Brecon, looking for Roman roads off Mynyddylltyd, not finding them. It's very heavily cultivated through here. But we have the sort of rise of the landscape up from the Usk Valley, these shelter belts leading up to the Brecon Beacons themselves, Penavon and Corndee, with a dusting of snow and cloud blowing off them as well, looking a little like Everest in this shot. A colder landscape, the Preseli Hills, looking over Crymych, that's got Preseli here as well, and a real deep freeze towards Foel Tregarn, Hillfort, and the Preseli Hills, the old bluestone outcrops here on the summit of the Preselis. And we can see this parliamentary enclosure landscape, one of the very few in Pembrokeshire that links Crymych and the villages to the east. So this parliamentary enclosure taking in this moorland and then the open hills of the Preseli Hills, which are covered in archaeology when we're lucky enough to have this winter light to record them. The highest peak in Wales, Snowdon, when we get up there, it's looking stunning in the winter. This is a shot from December 2012, with the station very much closed and iced up. You can see a lucky pair of people standing on the summit, another walker just climbing up from the Watkin path here, but certainly challenging mountain conditions on that day. And flying in the hills on the mountains of Wales, you're really relying on the expertise of the pilot. You can have, unless you have an exceptionally good day with light winds and no cloud, you'll have all sorts of problems with thermals and downdrafts in the mountains here. And a downdraft is particularly alarming. The pilot, an experienced pilot, will always have a way out of the valley or the mountain range he's in. He'll always know where to go. He'll always have somewhere to go. And I experienced a downdraft once off the ridge of Snowdon. When the aircraft instruments tell you it's climbing, the nose is up and the power is full on, but you can see the altimeter is sinking fast because the downdraft is pushing the aircraft down towards the ground. So this is why we have fantastic commercial pilots taking us to these high peaks of Wales. It's the only safe way to go. And the last look at some of the landscapes, this was December 2019, when I was routing up to Mold and northeast Wales. These phenomenal effects of inversions and cold air we have. This is Arran Valddwy, just in from Dinas Mawddwy, one of the other high peaks of Wales, with cloud pretty much infilling the block of Snowdonia, Tras Fynedd, Cad Ridgeway, and is creeping over the ridge of Arran Valddwy, and this beautiful reddish brown of the dead bracken uplands here as well in that December light. So it's stunning to be over these landscapes. But this is the real time to see archaeology, these lovely snowy winter's day. Here's St Mary's Church, Penmynydd, just above Bridgend actually, on the way up from Bridgend. These beautiful blue, long shadows showing the crenellations on the tower of the church. Now, snow and winter light can transform even well-known monuments. This is Pentre Ifan Burial Chamber in Pembrokeshire. It's just on television a couple of weeks ago on that Stonehenge documentary. The beautiful stone chamber, not showing too well actually. It looks very dark here because the snow is bouncing all that light off. It's a real light and shadow play when you'll have snowy landscapes. But somebody's down here, I think they've got a tripod under their arm, possibly a photographer, walking around to get some lovely winter photographs. But we have some magical effects on some of the great monuments of Wales. Castell Coch, of course, William Burgess's high Victorian fantasy, a rebuilding of a 12th century castle at Toninglaeth on the outskirts of Cardiff. And we can see the drawbridge inn, the fairy tale domes on the towers, and the medieval chimneys, and this lovely enclosed courtyard here as well. And you can see the snow starting to melt on the roofs here, but look at the air frost in the trees, absolutely wonderful. And this is a long lens here. Behind us, we have the mountain, Caerphilly Mountain, and the uplands, so we don't want to get too low over Castell Coch here. We have some very busy prehistoric landscapes in Wales, and winter light shows them to perfection. As I was saying with Penna Creek, when we have these brackeny upland landscapes, like here at Carningley Common, we have a lot of bracken, a lot of heather, and in the summer and the autumn, it can be quite difficult to make out the archaeology. Here on Carningley Common, just below the big hill fort, this blanket of snow has transformed the landscape. Again, a little like LiDAR, the colour is gone, and we can see prehistoric roundhouses, probably Iron Age, perhaps Bronze Age, perhaps 4,500 years old. Another one here, another roundhouse here. Clearance cairns of early agriculture in the middle of these fields. You can see the field boundaries and the routes of paths or trackways between them. So a very, very complicated prehistoric landscape revealed with a gift of snow on this occasion. Sometimes the snow is quite deep. This is a photograph from 2013 of Coed Gaeaf Hill Fort. This is on the upland ridge between Llantrisant and Bridgend in South Wales. And we can see the lovely shadows of the bushes growing on the ramparts and this effects of wind, these dramatic streamlined drifts crossing this Iron Age hill fort. A very simple hill fort, no signs of any other earthworks that we're missing. So probably a family home built on this ridge, but the ditches pretty much infilled with snow as you go around them, and every imperfection and bush picking up a drift of its own. But when we have a very thin blanket of snow and perfect lighting, we can really get some more detail on these earthworks. This is Wern Camp at Glascwm, a little valley up from Hundred House in the Radisher Valleys, Radisher Commons of Powys. And we can see an Iron Age hill fort. There's the modern farm that's taken its place probably. The ploughing's removed the rampart here, but we see the outer rampart and gateway here, an inner gateway, suggestion of a little roundhouse platform inside the gateway, a little enclosure within, and there's the banks and ditches at the back of the fort. So we can extract an enormous amount of information from these snowy pictures. Central Radisher, Central Wales is a great place for doing reconnaissance for archaeology. Here we are at Bilthwells, the Royal Welsh Showground, probably not long after the Winter Fair. And you can see the valleys are actually look quite dark when your eyes adjust to the snow on the tops. It takes a little while to adjust to the valleys where the snow has melted. But here we can see the Royal Welsh Showground Centre with quarries, and on the Carneddau range behind, we have a group of very interesting Iron Age hill forts, usually tricky to photograph on upland, brackeny common land, but in winter they stand out really well. Caerinion here, with a simple rampart here and an inturned gateway, and then nothing much else actually, just open land. Cumberwyn promontory fort here, and Gaeaf as well. You remember the big defences of Penacreek at Brecon, built by an Iron Age community who could afford to build ramparts all around their hill fort. Here, I think they had slightly less resources, fewer people to build. So they probably completed this rampart with a fence. Here at Cumberwyn, they didn't need any other defences around the back. You can see where the houses were inside, and Gaeaf is a bit of a muddle, really. This rock must have been very difficult to build on. So 3 small rural hill forts of the Iron Age in this Radisher uplands. But then we have, just nearby, Castle Bank, which is one of the grand Iron Age hill forts of Wales. Huge ridge, it's on open access common land. Go and see it after COVID. A big, confident, well-built stone rampart, which shows signs of burning or vitrification around the gate, possibly an attack, possibly just a bracken fire in the summer. An addition, an annex here, and then look at all these house platforms crowded in the interior, all these roundhouses which would have stood here. And we see a similar interior at Foyle Tregarn Hill Fort in Pembrokeshire on the Preseli Hills, the 3 cairns of its place name, and then about 270 Iron Age house platforms in the main enclosure, the outer enclosure, in the annex, and beyond the annex here, these little dimples. This photograph was the first one to show these houses continuing outside the ramparts. And were it not for the snow, we wouldn't have seen them on this sort of upland common land. We wouldn't have been able to pick that out. Sometimes you discover new bits of Iron Age enclosures. At Margam, above Swansea, we have a very interesting group of enclosures on Mynydd Margam, which look like specialised cattle enclosures of the Iron Age. Look at this at Moylton Mawr, this beautiful angular enclosure built in the pre-Roman Iron Age with an entranceway into a settlement enclosure. But the snow just showing up an additional earthwork here. And it's in times like this, we'll let Cadw know that there's an additional bit of the archaeology that possibly needs protecting, along with the main thing that everybody's seen in the past. And when we have drifting and melting of snow, that can give us so much more information on the rural landscape. Just west of Carmarthen town, we have Castach-y-Gaea Hill Fort here, and you can see an inner phase here, another earthwork, and the snow is melting on that. So the bank is a little bit warmer, actually. But here, the snow is preserved here. And we can see cultivation across here, so part of that's been ploughed down, and then quite old cultivation within this part of the Iron Age hill fort, possibly medieval or post-medieval. But what's interesting here on the right at Llangynog, we have a Romano-British defended farmstead. It's a rectangular farmstead with a nice gateway, probably built in 100 or 200 AD for a Romanised farmer. But what I hadn't seen before in this snow are these very faint braided trackways, these old trackways predating the present fields. You see the field boundaries go over them. Is this a prehistoric and Roman trackway? Is this an old road, essentially, that the enclosure was built alongside? And it's just that drifting snow which is allowing us to see that very, very old fragment of the ancient landscape. When we get extreme drifting and the melting, this can really make for some dramatic imagery. Here we are up over Llyn Clywedog in Montgomeryshire, the Great Clywedog Dam here near Llanidloes and the reservoir. And you can see the snow is hanging on, really melting fast, but staying in the ditches and gullies of the landscape below the plain. Here we are at Dinas. You see the road here has actually fossilized what was an earlier pass. And all these trackways show where drovers and people have been moving cattle over the years have passed through this gully in the mountains. And above it, we have Dinas Hill Fort, a rampart here on the top, another lower rampart here. But it's not really, I don't think it's an Iron Age hill fort here. It's such an extreme and remote location. It may even be a late Bronze Age enclosure, about 2000 BC, or possibly even a Neolithic causewayed enclosure from about 3000 BC. It's a very remote spot and very basic bit of building for an Iron Age hill fort. So an interesting site and a new view of it here with this melting snow. Snow helps us a lot in the uplands, as I've been saying. And one particular site is Gaeaf Roman Fort, which lies between Llangerig and Ponterwyd in the Plynham and Footlands. If you drive past the Sweetland Rally Complex on your way to Aberystwyth, this is on the left-hand side of the car, and you can often not even see it. It's on a really ragged bit of upland, long grass, a lot of bushes, a lot of forestry around it as well. And yet in this view, with wind-blown snow in 2013, just showing those Roman ramparts up to perfection. The gateway here, the Roman playing card corners, a doubling up of the rampart here, and even what looks like a river running through the middle of the fort, perhaps through a fortified water supply. And I think we have to feel sorry for the Roman soldiers, the legionaries and auxiliaries staying here in a Welsh winter 2,000 years ago when they were still pushing west to conquer Ceredigion. Must have been terribly difficult up here. Into the medieval period, we have some remarkable monuments. This is the view of Caerphilly, which was used to publicise the talk. Still one of my favourite shots. You know, Caerphilly is at the southern end of the South Wales valleys, and there's a bit of a ridge to the south, but it's quite close to the Severn Estuary. So to see the whole town covered in deep snow was remarkable. And punching a hole out of the middle of the town is Caerphilly Medieval Castle, the greatest medieval fortress in Wales, second only in size to Windsor Castle amongst the medieval fortresses of Britain. So this is a monument we have to be proud of. The great castle, and it's in a keep, a great gatehouse, its leaning tower, slighted in the Civil War. The North Pond, covered in ice, and the South Pond, the South Lake, and these great dams designed to hold back these water gardens. And clearly a highly strategic spot. We have the remains of a Roman fort in the corner here under the trees, and then later a Civil War redoubt, all now, of course, protected monuments. But what an impact this snowy fortress is making within the modern town. We can look down on all the streets and cars and bus stations of a frozen Caerphilly back in 2013. A much more modest medieval castle by comparison, Castell Cregherydd in New Radnor. Now this is a very prominent medieval motte and bailey castle. There's the motte, this is the bailey enclosure. This lies by the main road from Crossgates to New Radnor in central Wales. So you can see it from the car as you drive past. And it's believed Gerald of Wales actually stayed the night here in 1188. And we can only imagine this when it was a timber castle with fortifications, possibly looking like something out of Braveheart, the film. But now it's an earthwork, but the low light and the snow shows us what it has been. We can see elements of a braided trackway crossing past the castle here that's now been ploughed out of the way by centuries of ploughing. So just traces of a trackway there. And you can see the ploughing is clipped up against the earthwork here. And behind us, we have some medieval ploughing behind there as well. So it's a castle surviving in a modern landscape. And even the great castles become mundane bits of the rural landscape in the end, don't they? This is Payne's Castle, Motte and Bailey. Now, I think this is probably not a castle that's that visible to many people nowadays. It's tucked away on a back road between Wales and Hale Wye. But from the air, what a powerful castle. Established in the 12th century, as an earthwork modern bailey, this great castle mound, this great bailey, this vast ditch, which has actually absorbed a modern farm building in it now. It was built, destroyed, reoccupied, destroyed over several skirmishes in its history. Henry III took it over in the 13th century and built a stone keep on the top of the motte and built turrets around the base of it. There's one there, and more stone buildings and the gatehouse. But you can see, like all the other castles, it resorts to agriculture in the end. We have sort of steam power cultivation by the looks of it across the middle of the enclosure, possibly 19th century. But you can see sheep grazing around it, a lot of detail in this winter photograph. And we can see some of the earthworks under the trees there as well. Another great medieval monument, Stratflorida Abbey under snow. We've had to bump up the light here a bit. You can see that's where the sunlight is. Stratflorida was under cloud a little bit on this winter's afternoon. So we've snapped a picture anyway. A wonderful abbey, long since robbed almost to its foundations in places to build the later farm buildings and other farm buildings around the landscape. But the amazing Cistercian gatehouse was clearly too splendid for anybody to rob, and we're so lucky that we still have that standing at the end of the nave today as one of the great medieval gatehouses of Wales, really. This is an older photograph now. This area has been improved for visitors now, and the Stratflorida project is now working on the farmhouse and the buildings. And I've just seen today on social media, they've got a new 3D model of Stratflorida Abbey that they're trialing, which is actually all in white. It's a computer model all in white. So tempted to drop it in now, but I wouldn't have permission. But do look at that new 3D model of Stratflorida coming soon. And in conversely to Stratflorida, such a tiny medieval church here on a remote hill. This is again on that Llanharan uplands between Llantrisant and Bridgend, the St. Peter's Church, which is actually quite an iconic church in Welsh history, and used up until the 18th century when the yard was used to sort of market livestock as well. But only tiny, a 20-metre long nave on this church, and the low winter shadow showing us the craggy ruin that stands there, even though we're looking straight down at the ruins and the landscape. And we can see this drifting snow. It must have been a terribly remote and windblown church to visit in medieval times. But these uplands are so busy and crossed by many, many trackways. Away from the castles and the abbeys, we can see the homes of the rural, poor, the peasant farmers in the medieval landscape. On Mynydd Margam, just down near Port Talbot, we can see house platforms. These are rectangular scoops in the hillside where people built wooden and thatched houses. And often all that remains nowadays is the levelled platform on the hillside. And these are quite tricky to recognise at ground level, even from the air. And it's only the melting snow that allows us to see these on Mynydd Margam. And there's a trackway heading up to the settlement. And on the right, Cwmtwrch, a deserted rural settlement. We call these DRSs. Undated, probably medieval or late medieval, in the Radnorshire Commons. A small enclosure, the site of the farmhouse where that hollow is, ploughing of garden cultivation within. And this is one of the many deserted settlements that have been scheduled by Cadw after a big project in Wales in the early 2000s by the Welsh Archaeological Trusts to map these. But it's interesting, flying over Cwmtwrch, there it is in the wider landscape. That's the scheduled ancient monument. But the snow shows up a much wider, larger settlement that used to stand here. These are banks of fields around it, and there's one rectangle and another rectangle of a lost farmstead with a track leading down to the valley here. So this is Cwmtwrch and its neighbour, lost to the record until I took this photograph, but long since ploughed away in the landscape and forgotten. Other elements of the rural landscape that we see from the air that are more unusual, I guess, not as famous as castles. Pillow mounds on Coed Swydd at Llandeglu. These long rectangular and circular mounds were built to encourage rabbits to nest, and often they had stone chambers within them to allow rabbits to nest and breed, because rabbit meat, of course, was very important to rural economy for people to eat, and then the pelts could be sold at market. The Brecon Beacons has many, many industrial-sized rabbit farms in the hills, and the farmer's been baling up the bracken here, I see, so that's why it's so crisp and clear, with bracken bales stacked up here around the uplands. So they still do bracken baling on the Radnorshire Commons here. And even the smallest fragments of the rural landscape. Here we are in the tidy pools in that sharp winter. We saw a few slides back with snow just catching in the grooves of a small garden enclosure, which looks like it's got lazy bed cultivation inside it, somewhere to grow vegetables, maybe in 1500s, 1600s, another little enclosure here. So nearby there'll be a medieval or late medieval farmhouse, but real subsistence farming up here on the hillside, putting your composted waste into this garden enclosure, and that's where you grow your vegetables as well. So we can only imagine how very difficult life must have been up on these hills in winters. And the bigger monuments of the Welsh landscape, the braided trackways particularly. Now we see these often if you're driving in winter along the Wye Valley, the Elan Valley, you'll see these trackways descending from the hilltops. Here we are near Llandeglu in the Radnorshire Hills, and these long distance braided trackways climbing the mountains, used by drovers and people before them, possibly even with prehistoric origins as well. And where you see zigzags, it's often where people have been bringing peat down from the uplands on sledways. Now you get sort of zigzags like this, I'm not saying that is one, but there are a few good peat sledways we know about in Snowdonia and near Cadridris, which are an important reminder of that peat cutting industry of recent centuries. And we even discover quite recent monuments on a winter's day on Kilvey Hill, overlooking Swansea. We photographed these characteristic ditches flanked by little mounds. And these, we see them all around Swansea to the west and to the north, are Second World War anti-glider trenches. And now we know Swansea was terribly damaged by the Blitz of 1941, which has been in the news recently. And any area of open common before the Second World War was covered in anti-glider trenches. So if there was a nighttime landing by enemy gliders, they'd break up on impact. They still survive on some of the big common lands, but these two were new to the record on Kilvey Hill. And if it were not for this white covering of snow, I doubt they would have been so crisp and clear to be photographed. Just to sort of come towards an end, just to look at some communities in Wales under snow. And here we are with that morning light over Swansea, over May Hill. Football pitch, a little bit cold to play football that morning. I don't think anybody's been out to see how cold it is. People still waking up and a few cars have been out on the road. But it's a wonderful way to look at the communities of Wales from the air. Here we are over Cwm Rhondda Valley. When we're flying the South Wales valleys over Cwm Awyr, the Ogmore Valley, Aberdare, and Maesteg, we know this is Rhondda. Here's the railway line coming all the way up to the head of the valley, straight as a die there. We can still see on this particular day, looking down towards Cardiff, we've got air frost, still frosting the trees. The sun's getting down into the Rhondda. Very interesting valley archaeologically, loads of archaeology. Ton Pentro, where my grandfather grew up in the 20s, has got a nice hill fort. And then this is the mountain road that goes up and over to the Brecon Beacons past Llynfawr, the Great Lake, where we had that great Iron Age and Bronze Age hoard discovered at the start of the 20th century. So a very interesting historic valley, the Rhondda. Llantrisant on the sort of verge of the Vale of Glamorgan, had to put this in. We've got beautiful Christmassy snow, lovely yellow colours of the stones used in the building of the houses, and a well-preserved medieval borough here. The fragments of Llantrisant Castle here on its mound, and Castle Green in front. A medieval church here dedicated to 3 saints as well, and we can see a sort of borough enclosure around, fossilised in the village. The Bullring area, a former marketplace as well. So a really good way to study these villages and these historic villages to fly around Wales. The precision of a 19th century cemetery in Morriston here. And we can see rows and rows of graves, and with that long 200mm lens, it's high resolution photographs. We're getting all the detail on those individual gravestones here. And it'd be difficult to get that much detail, I think, on something like LiDAR airborne laser scanning. So it's still useful to have these photographs as well. And this was picked out with morning light coming over the valley. And a big bit of archaeology, Caerau Iron Age hill fort here, the triangle, and a medieval ringwork and medieval church, which dominates the suburb of Ely in Cardiff here. And Ely covered in snow here. There's the Docks Link Road going down towards Barry. And this is where we have a big community project run by Cardiff University and the local community to explore Caerau Hill Fort more. And their excavations a few years ago showed this started as a Neolithic causeway enclosure. So it's actually 5,000 years of settlement on this particular hill. And we can see the trees still frosted there. And coming to an end here as well, we so rarely see snow in the capital. You know, Cardiff's got these warm breezes coming off the Severn Estuary, the salt air, that to see a snowy morning over Cardiff is quite extraordinary. You can see the Civic Centre, City Hall, the museum here, Cardiff Castle, and then its modern Bailey within, built on the site of a Roman fort, of course, the Millennium Stadium, St David's Centre, the International Arena are here as well, and the River Taff, on a rather gloomy winter's morning back in January 2013. So before I finish, because I've probably kept you long enough, just a couple of interesting things one sees from the air. This is in 2009 over Carmarthenshire. Probably some of the biggest snow writing I've seen flying over Wales. Obviously, Davitt and Harry set out in the morning on their quad bikes and thought they'd write their names in the snow of their field. They must have known somebody with a microlight or an aeroplane here, because they didn't know I was coming across on that particular morning. So what an interesting thing to see written in the snow of the Carmarthenshire Vans there a few years ago. And flying over Ely for that shot of the hill fort you just saw, snapped some pictures of the school at Ely, the school playing fields around the Roman villa there. And it's only preparing this talk, you zoom into the high resolution photograph. And look what we have, individual footprints. The most snow angels I've ever seen. Somebody must have got very cold doing that, and a big snow angel down here as well. So the children have been having fun here on this snowy morning. And a few years ago at Crosshands as well, on a snowy bit of recreational ground, we saw Lauren and Lee marking their love for each other in the snow there on a winter's morning. So it's just nice to get these glimpses of Welsh society and Welsh community, and very transient traces of life, of course, because with a thaw, they'll all vanish. So we've had a flight around Wales, we've had a flight around the landscapes, the towns, and the archaeology. And here I am at the end of a December flight over the Berwyn range, coming back from Snowdonia a few years ago, coming back to Welshpool Airport, with December sun sinking, the clouds thickening, and it's going to be a very gloomy descent down to Welshpool Airport. And we just see the Cumberwyn Mountains sticking up there as well. And the last thing we see before we land on a winter's day is the shadow of the Cessna coming up to meet us. And by this stage, we're ready for a hot cup of tea. So that's it for the talk. I will just mention that only last week we launched a new version of our online database, Covlane, which you can see down there. And this has some incredible new image gallery facilities. I've shown you a handful of pictures tonight, and there are thousands out there. These are all the winter shots of Pennycreek at Brecon, for example. So do have a look at our new online gallery, and you can even download watermarked images for your own use. So it's a great facility. So I hope that's been an interesting talk. You can see our inquiries numbers there. Do get in touch. Do follow us on Twitter and Facebook as well. Many thanks for your time tonight. Diolch yn fawr.
Diolch yn fawr iawn i chi, Toby. Mae'n sgwrs arall hynod o ddifyr gyda lluniau trawiadol iawn o dros Gymru. It's amazing how during every talk you're able to share some new stunning images with us, Toby. And I'm sure others found it interesting as well to hear all about your working conditions, because I know that many are fascinated by your work and possibly a little envious as well. Felly diolch yn fawr iawn i ti. I hope you out there as well have enjoyed the talk and seeing those impressive images of Wales. We've got some questions coming in, Toby, so I hope you've got some time just to answer a few of them.
Certainly, yes, indeed.
So one of the first questions was, how long can you stay airborne on the winter flights?
Well, the Cessna will fly for 5 or 6 or 7 hours on full tanks, but we're regulated by the law to land within 3 hours for fuel. And you always have to have enough fuel to reposition twice, because if you fly all the way back to your destination airfield or your home airfield and it's fogged in, then you have to fly somewhere else to land. So we land after 3 hours for fuel, and in winter that's more than enough. You need a cup of tea by then.
I'm sure, yeah, be coding it for you. Oh, thank you for that. And then, oh, this is an interesting one. What is the most surprising find you've discovered from the air?
Well, there's been a few surprising finds. The ones I always go back to are the Roman marching camps around Caerwent Roman town, which come up in droughts. We always thought Caerwent Roman town was a peaceful settlement, but in the last 5 years we found 2 aggressive Roman military camps near there, so it may have originally have been a contested territory. So the Roman camps around Caerwent are interesting. But for snowy winter shots, you've seen some of my favourite winter archaeology tonight. For me, I think it's still those transient markings in the snow, you know, the people writing things in the snow when you fly past, that's so valuable for me to get that into the archive. It's rather nice, really.
That's great, thank you. There's a question asking, where is Castle Bank? It's one of the images you've shown tonight.
Castle Bank's inland of Llandrindod Wells and north of Builth Wells, so it's in the Ranshire Commons there. So it's open access land. So if you're travelling south of Llandrindod Wells, you have to sort of get your map out and look in. And it's a lovely hill fort to walk over and have a look around.
Okay, thank you. And we've had one question from Florida for you, Toby.
Oh, great.
Do you fly at a standard height for taking the aerial photographs? They're asking this because their son-in-law flies for the US Fish and Wildlife at low altitude. Oh. And so the second question, how often do you get false positives once you ground verify?
Yeah, I mean, flying height again is governed by the law. I think we're governed to about 500 feet over the Welsh landscape in the rural areas and about 1,000 feet over towns. And so we have to keep nice and high for safety, really, and to keep out of military traffic as well. So we keep nice and high, and especially over the Welsh uplands, where we've got a lot of military jets training nowadays. They do pick us up on their radar, but it's better to have a longer lens and to keep the aeroplane high and to see those Hawk jets go under the plane. That's the best and safest way to do it. So we never go too low. But in terms of false positives, generally you're pretty good interpreting archaeology now from the air. But I get a lot of pleasure. People send in things they spot on Google Earth, particularly, and say, is this archaeology? And sometimes it's where you've had a maze cut in the corn a couple of years ago, or somebody's had a fair in a field, and you can say, well, that's not archaeology, that's modern. But occasionally people do send in amazing things. And a chap called Eric a few years ago discovered a Romano-British temple near Sully in South Wales on Google Earth imagery, which is now on the record and published. So there's a lot out there for people to spot.
That's great, diolch. A cwestiwn yma gen Gina. Mae di mwynhau'r sgwrs senol diddorol iawn fel rhaglen gyffredinol, a bydd cyflwyniadau eraill yn fwy thematig arbenigol y dyfodol. Fe wnawn ni sicr edrych ar hynna, Gina, a mae rhaglen o darlithoedd yn mynd I fod ymlaen gyda ni. Gina's asking about sort of future talks, and we will be, this is the first of a series of talks, so there will be a few more coming on as well. Quite a lot of thank yous, Toby. Just trying to go through them to make sure I don't miss any. Oh, right, okay. Question here. Have you ever taken Richard Suggett up with you? I wonder if his view of buildings is influenced by an aerial view of them.
I haven't taken Richard flying. It's not everybody's cup of tea, but I haven't asked Richard, actually. You get so much more when you have an expert in the back of a plane, a local expert who knows the landscape below the aircraft. And that's why we've taken John Roberts from Snowdonia, we've taken Louise Meese from Cadw, a lot of other colleagues up flying. But unless you've got a strong stomach, after a couple of hours, it can sort of lose the shine can wear off a bit if you're in the back of the aircraft. So we always try and share the experience with people and so on as well. But my first flights to people are usually half an hour, 40 minutes, just so leave them wanting more and get down to the airfield in time for lunch.
Yes, I remember, Toby, you kindly, when I started with the commission, you offered to take me up, but as I became living on a waltzers, I decided it might not be safe for me to come up, but it's a lovely experience for those who can stomach it, I'm sure. There's another question here about, does the snow show different things to a drought? Yes, it does.
A drought will be useful in the uplands, so the South Wales valleys in a drought. You'll see industrial quarry tram roads because the stone sleepers on the tram roads parch out through the soil. So buried tram roads show in droughts. And winter will be up there. You'll get the benefit of lower vegetation. The brackens died off. You'll see more archaeology and you'll see those lumps and bumps and the thermal differences we've been seeing, where we discover a ditched enclosure under the soil just because the ditch is melting the snow. You may see that in a drought, but if it's down near a river valley, the ground may be too damp to show in a dry season. So yeah, you have to fly in a drought, you have to fly in a winter, and both those bits of information combine to understand the archaeology.
Great. There's a question here as well about how far across the border into England do you stray? Bearing in mind that archaeology does not stop at a man-made line on the map. No,
it doesn't. I don't photograph anything in England, and if I do, I send it to my colleagues in Historic England, because our remit's just for Wales. But occasionally I get trips into the foreign country. I had to refuel at Filton Airfield once in Bristol when I was landing in South Wales, and I was able to take off opposite Concord, which was rather nice. And in the 2018 drought, I was very busy down near Chepstow, so we went off to Gloucester Airfield to get some lunch and get some more fuel. But normally I have to keep myself in England, in Wales. But my colleagues in Historic England fly Shropshire, Herefordshire and Cheshire, so they do all the work along there.
That's great. You mentioned in one of the images, this question from Dewi, that you said was remote now. Would it have been remote at the time, though, dependent on climate, etc.?
Well, yeah, I think the uplands, certainly some of the central Wales uplands, where we have small farmsteads, deserted farms and deserted medieval houses, you know, you had climatic variation, which may have meant it was quite productive to live up there above the 200-metre contour and farm and grow vegetables. But I think there were other times where it would have been real subsistence living, maybe in the 16th, 17th centuries. For some of these rural houses up in the hills, it would have been a very difficult life. You would have some livestock, you'd be growing some of your own crops, but very susceptible to wet winters and cold winters, I'm sure. So yeah, we have to think about past climates allowing more farming at upper levels, but I think it's always quite tough in some of those high mountain landscapes.
Okay, that's great. This one here from Jack about, oh, thank you for an excellent talk, Toby. It's asking, have you been able to identify any new villa sites in West Wales?
No, the Stonehenge work that was on television a couple of weeks ago, the documentary, they did some geophysics near Awyr, which brought up a previously unrecorded Roman villa, which we wouldn't have spotted otherwise. And that was the most recent to turn up. But Abermagor Villa is still the only one in Ceredigion, and we've got a handful in Carmarthenshire and Pembrokeshire, but they're elusive, difficult things to spot. So I'm always on the lookout for them, and there must be more, but I haven't found any more recently.
Okay, that's great. And there's one last question here. How can you tell a medieval upland settlement from a squatter settlement? And they love the image of Tavy pools. Great,
that's good. It's difficult. We have squatter settlements from any time in the Middle Ages onwards, and often you'll have those fossilised in modern cottage settlements. So particularly you have a lot of these in Cymru around Devil's Bridge and Ceredigion, where you have dispersed cottage settlements that started as squatter settlements. It's difficult. I'm straying into territory that's probably Richard Suggett's territory here in terms of medieval settlement. Sometimes you can tell it's likely to be a medieval house. You have a big, confident medieval platform, a rectangular building, maybe some stonework. But everybody acknowledges that between the sort of 13th century and the 18th century in the uplands of Wales, farms and ruins can age very quickly. And you can have a farm that was occupied to the 18th century. We look at it now, and it's an earthwork. It's almost vanished in the landscape, only 200 years later. So things can age very quickly and look older than they are. And actually, we need far more excavation and research on some of these upland sites to really get those dates nailed down.
That's great, Diolch, Toby. And there's, if you've got time, shall we take just another couple?
Yeah, sure.
They're coming in, they come fast here. I'm trying to make sure I'm not missing them in the middle of all the great thank yous to you, Toby. There's one here. Have you found any new castle sites, moats and baileys or ringworks?
Not so much, no. They're very well studied, the castles of Wales. What we have found more are Grange sites, monastic sites, so these smaller sort of monastic farms where we've been lucky. These are often recorded. People like David Williams has made records of the Granges. You'll know a big abbey will have a number of Granges around it. You know, won't know quite where they are. So around Stormy Down at Ogmore years ago, I came up with Grange earthworks near Motte Bailey there. And up the Tyvy Valley as well, we came up with Grange earthworks about 10 years ago that had previously been unrecorded. So it's those fragments of the medieval landscape that we're finding more of. We know where the abbeys and the castles are, but it's how that landscape worked that still needs to be uncovered.
Okay, and there's one here about Epint. They're asking, are you allowed to fly over and take photographs over the Epint? Yes, we are,
and we did quite a lot of air photography there. I was last over there for intensive air photography in 2007, actually. Since then, the military lands are produced in Britain, and Epint's become a really busy training ground, especially with more recent conflicts as well. I'm on the conservation committee for Cynnebridge, so they look after their archaeology really well. But it's often been so busy there that it's been difficult even to get in non-firing months like August and the Christmas period. But there's some really good archaeology up there. And if you look on Covlane, we've got some great stuff archived. And even actually, I have to say, behind the cameras here, the Above Brecon book, which is still around, Chris Muffin and I did, has got lots of the really good Epint archaeology from the air in its pages.
That's great. Yes, it'd be worth having a look at that. There's one last one. This one's slightly more technical, I think. Have you been able to fuse the multispectral data with your photos to clarify some of the groundworks? That's a question from Russ.
Yeah, we're doing limited stuff with multispectral in Wales. I've got colleagues in Scotland who are doing multispectral and hyperspectral air photography and doing infrared modifications to cameras in England as well. What we're looking at more, we're doing some of this in the Cherish European project, looking at climate change and coastal heritage. We have colleagues in Ireland looking at attaching hyperspectral scanners to heavyweight drones like the DJI Matrice. And really then you can do repeated visits to the same field to see how that technique's working. So I'm not doing much of that in the air at the moment, but there's huge potential for remote sensing, obviously, for satellite imagery and for drone survey using hyperspectral.
That's great, Toby. Well, it's gone over 6 o'clock, so I think there's a couple of more questions, but possibly, Toby, we can have a look at them and reply to them again if I've missed a few as well.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, because if you do have any further questions for Toby, or if I'm very sorry if I have missed your question tonight, please do contact us.
Drop us a line, I'm happy to answer them.
Yeah.
No, I always get distracted about questions for aerial archaeology, so that's fine, good.
Toby's email address is there for you on the screen there. You can either email him directly, or you can either contact us through our social media channels, or, as I say, contact our general email address or Toby's directly, or contact Toby directly as well. And we would appreciate as well if you could take a couple of minutes just to share your feedback on tonight's talk. There's a link to a short survey on the chat, and it is a very short survey, so we would appreciate that. Felly, fel dwi'n dweud, mae croeso chi unrhyw gwestiynau pellach atom ar ôl heno. Byddwn ni hefyd yn croesawu unrhyw adborth sydd ganddoch chi am y sgwrs yma. Mae dolen I arolwg byr isod yn y chat, a mae wir yn arolwg bach byr iawn. Gathon ni gwestiwn yn holi do'n gwestiynau pellach, am sgwrsiau pellach. Mae ganddon ni sgwrs arall mae'r nesaf wedi'w drefnu ar gyfer y cyntaf o fis Ebrill. Our next talk has been arranged for the 1st of April, again at 5 o'clock, and that's a Thursday evening as well. And that will be given by one of our colleagues who is working with Toby on the Cherish project, and that's by Daniel Hunt. And the title of the talk, Living on the Brink, which sounds very exciting, is going to be uncovering the stories of Pembrokeshire's eroding promontory forts. Felly gobeithio'n fawr byddwch chi'n ymuno ni ar gyfer y sgwrs yna. Felly gloi, fe hoffwn ni ddiolch yn fawr iawn I chi gyd am ymuno ni heno, staff o Comisiwn am drefnu, ac yn olaf wrth gwrs diolch yn fawr iawn I chi Toby am sgwrs ddiddorol yn llawn lluniau bendigedig o Gymru. Hyfryd gweld nhw'n dydig am bod ni methu teithio ar hyn o bryd. So thank you all for joining us tonight. Thank you to the Commission staff who have been involved with all the arrangement, and of course to Toby for another fascinating talk and for sharing those beautiful images of Wales with us. Diolch yn fawr iawn, Toby. Thank you all. Nos da I chi.